Hi, I'm Darlene and welcome to my farm kitchen. This time of year, life gets pretty hectic on the farm. It's spring and we've just finished lambing and planting pastures and doing all kinds of things outside, getting my garden ready. And sometimes at the end of the day, I'm just too tired to fix dinner. And it's funny, I'm in the business of growing food for my community and for my family. And then at the end of the day, sometimes I just don't feel like cooking dinner. So when days like that happen, I lean on soup. And usually I have some in the freezer. Today I'm going to make a fresh pot and we're going to have it for dinner, and then I will freeze the rest and we'll use it when I get in a pinch. Today I'm making something that's somewhat regional, I think. I'm not sure that people all over the country have eaten, the green lime bean and dumpling soup, but here on the eastern shore of Maryland, it was pretty much a staple in our household. My mom made it quite often. She worked in the field all day with my dad, and just sometimes, we got in really late, so she could start a pot of soup and put it on a simmer and do other things around the farm and check on the soup periodically. In order to speed up the process for soup, sometimes I'll use a ham hock or smoked ham bones, but today I'm actually just going to use a smoked ham slice. It's something that you can find in the grocery store. I really would prefer that you buy it from your local farmer. We raise mule-foot pigs, and they have a wonderful fat cap on the ham. And our local processor, their curing process is just so delicious. So I'm going to take this ham steak and I'm going to dice it up. The first thing I'm going to do is trim off the fat, and I'm going to start that in a pan. I have a heavy Dutch oven. Let's see here. It's a pretty big ham steak. Honestly, I don't think I need the whole thing, but the one thing about it being a little larger is I won't have to have anything else with the soup for dinner except for maybe a fresh slice of sourdough bread or some biscuits. I am working on a sourdough discard biscuit recipe, and I will know pretty shortly if I was successful with that. I'm going to grab a wooden spoon. Okay. It's probably maybe 2 tablespoons of fat. If you don't have any fat on the ham steak, you can certainly add a little bit of cooking oil just to get some browning happening. And I'm going to just take this, cut it up into more manageable pieces. I know some people are really turned off by the idea of having fat in their food, but I'm not one of them. I like to incorporate healthy animal fats almost into every meal. And I'm putting that right in my pot as I go. If you hear any huffing and puffing, my old dog is in here laying at my feet. And she likes to make a lot of noise. When they cure our ham, sometimes we get some of the end pieces that appear to be less than desirable, and I don't always want to sell those to the customer unless I discount them, and I sell them for soup bones, like meaty soup bones. But usually I take and keep that just for me to make soup. I'm going to cut this marrow bone out. I'm actually going to put that in there. And I think that's more than enough ham, so what I'll do is I'll save these 2 pieces and I'll saute them up with potatoes and onions for breakfast. And I've got a head start on tomorrow. I've got a carrot. I like to add pretty much celery, onion, and carrot to all my soups. I think it really adds a lot of flavor. I don't always have chicken stock or vegetable stock on hand, so this is just like a way to add a quick vegetable stock to a soup. Fairly even, they'll cook about the same time. I'm using these vegetables to impart a lot of flavor into the broth, but they don't need to be very large. In fact, when the soup's done cooking, I don't even care if you can see the onion and the celery. Obviously, the carrot's not going to disappear, but it's all about adding flavor, layering it on. I'm only going to use half of this onion because it's really large, so it will be used in my hash browns tomorrow also. I'm going to go ahead and add just about half a teaspoon of black pepper, maybe a half a teaspoon of salt. I don't want the soup really salty. I prefer to add a little extra salt at the table. My husband likes quite a bit of salt and I prefer less, so once it's in there you can't take it out. I'm going to let this cook a good while. I'd like to have some color on my ham and my vegetables before I add the rest of the ingredients. I'm going to crank up the heat just a second. When I was a kid, you couldn't buy, I don't think, we never did anyway, you couldn't buy frozen dumplings in the freezer section like you can now. And there are a lot of nice frozen products, or you can even use egg noodles, whatever you'd like. But I'm going to also share with you my mom's slippery dumpling recipe. And as soon as I get this soup really rolling, I'm going to move it to the side and I will go ahead and start with the dumplings. I'm going to add 1 jar of tomatoes that I grew in the garden. If you don't can your own tomatoes, just get about a 16-ounce jar. I like the whole tomatoes and juice for soup. I love the addition of some frozen corn to this. And I'm going to add about 3 cups of Fort Hook Lima beans. I'm going to put just about a quart of water. And I'm going to let this come up to a pretty good simmer and let that cook while I make my dumplings. I have my mom's recipe. I'm actually going to cut the recipe in half just because my husband and I don't need a huge pot of soup. This is a pretty good size. When my mom would make soup, I mean, it was a stock pot, a big stock pot. And so she probably needed the whole recipe for that. We're going to start with 1.5 cups of all-purpose flour. Hush, Hazel. 1/4 teaspoon of kosher salt. 1/4 teaspoon of baking powder. I'm going to stir this just to incorporate the salt and the baking powder. I'm going to measure out a 1/4 cup of lard. If you don't have lard or don't know how to make it, I think they actually sell it in the grocery store now, or if you have a farmer close to you who raises a high quality hog, I've got a video on how you can render your own. My mom used lard when we were young, and then as she got older and we stopped raising pigs for a while, she switched to vegetable shortening, and that was before we realized that hydrogenated fats really weren't what we should be eating, at least in my opinion. So I have a farm fresh egg, the beautiful golden yolk. I'm going to whisk that up. I'm going to add my shortening right into the bowl of flour. I'm going to add 2 tablespoons of water, and we'll see if that's enough. And then I'm going to add my egg. You can use a pastry cutter, or I like the large fork. I need 1 more tablespoon of water. I'm going to dip my fingers in some water. I'm going to knock off the excess, and I'm going to pull this together in a ball. And instead of adding extra water in like a tablespoon form, I'm just dampening my hands a little bit until the dough really feels very nice and pliable, which it is. I'm going to cover this and I'm going to let it rest for about 30 minutes. That way the dough will roll out a little more easily. And I'm going to clean up and I'll be right back. All right, we're gonna take this, just put a little bit of bench flour, not too much. I like to cut it in quarters so that the dough is more manageable. I'm gonna lightly cover the other three so they don't dry out. Putting a little bit of flour on my rolling pin. And we'll see if I let this rest long enough. If it wants to keep bouncing back, you can let it rest just a few minutes. But this looks like it's going to work. I like the dumplings really thin. I grew up in a thin, slippery dumpling family. And I know some people like the drop dumplings, but that's not something I grew up with. And honestly, sometimes I just don't want to veer from tradition. And you can see the thickness of that. They're pretty daggone thin. And just use my pizza cutter. The dumplings are going to swell up a little bit when you put them in the soup and they've cooked for a while, then they sit in there. So you want to start with a pretty thin dumpling because this is the thinnest they're ever going to be when they're in the soup. I'm going to add just about another pint of water. And you can do this to your judgment depending on how thick you want the soup to be. But just remember that your dumplings are going to absorb a lot of moisture, and then you're also going to have the soup boiling again, which will evaporate off some of the liquid. I'm going to go ahead and fish out my marrow bone now so nobody else finds it. Before I add my dumplings, I'm going to go ahead and just taste the broth to see if it needs any more salt and pepper. I think it needs just a little bit more. So I started with a ½ teaspoon, and I'm probably going to just put maybe another ½ teaspoon in. Our soup's starting to come up to a little bit of a bubbling boil. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start dropping in my dumplings, just a few at a time. The addition of dumplings could bring your temperature down. So I'm going to add 6, 7, 8. And these are small. So I'm going to add about 10 dumplings. I'm going to stir it really well. I'm going to go ahead and let it start coming back up to a boil. That addition shouldn't really change the temperature tremendously, but if you cool your soup down too quickly by adding all the dumplings, you're going to come out and all of your dumplings are going to want to stick together. I'm only going to use half of the recipe that I started with. You can see the dumplings are already starting to swell up a little bit. I don't think I'm going to use all of these. I love the corn and the lima beans so much that I don't want them to be overpowered by the dumplings. I've got this over a medium-high heat. I'm going to put a lid, just a jar, not quite tight on there. The steam will be able to escape. Okay, I've rolled out the extra dumplings. I'm going to stick them in the freezer for just about 20 minutes. It won't take long for these to freeze pretty solid because they're small. And then I'm going to put them in a Ziploc bag and I will store them for my next batch of soup or chicken and dumplings. Okay, this soup has had a chance to cool. I will warn you, it really holds heat, so make sure you let it cool before you dive in. It's really good. I like the combination of the tomatoes and the corn and the lima beans. The ham is so flavorful. Let's try the slippery dumpling. Tastes just like my mom's. And then my sourdough biscuit. Turned out really good. Nice and flaky, super moist. I'm actually going to try making it with honey instead of the granulated sugar, and I hope to have that recipe up by next week. I really appreciate you spending some time with me today, and I hope you enjoy making the soup. Thanks. Yum.